Hello and welcome to another video from City Self-Sufficiency. Today we're going to be looking at everything you need to get started with raising your own poultry chicks at home. So this goes for chickens, ducks, quail, guinea fowl, geese. All poultry need exactly the same equipment. The only thing you might want to look at adjusting is the size of things. So if you're raising goslings, for example, they're going to need a much bigger bowl than quail. It's common sense. But anyway, without further ado, let's crack on. No pun intended. The very first thing you need to make sure of is that you can actually get hold of some hatching eggs. These are fertile eggs that have come from females that have been running with males, so they're actually going to hatch. The ones that you buy in a store normally come from a female-only group, so obviously they haven't been fertilised, you're not going to be able to get any chicks out of them. Best places I find to look for buying hatching eggs, eBay is a big one for me, there are some brilliant breeders on there. Best time to buy them, you're looking at sort of mid to late spring. This is when the birds are most naturally at their most fertile. This is especially true if you're looking at raising heritage type species, the ones that will stop laying during the winter. It can take them a little while to get going, so it's best not to look at buying hatching eggs from them until late spring at the earliest. So as I have mentioned, I tend to buy eggs from eBay. The fertility can be affected a little bit from being posted, but I would still expect at least an 80% hatch rate. Anything less than that and I would start questioning whether they were fertile to begin with. Very rarely eggs can be damaged in transit. Obviously postage, they tend not to be too gentle with things. Any eggs which you have that are cracked must be discarded. There is no point trying to incubate those. If you do, it's highly likely they will rot, which can release ammonia, and then that will be deadly for the remaining eggs. So you'll end up with 0 hatch because one had gone off. Don't worry if the breeder has written on the eggs in pencil, that won't do them any harm, but if any arrive to you and they've been written on in pen, I would complain and send those back. You don't know what chemicals are in ink, you don't know what kind of effect that could have on the developing chicks. I mean, maybe some ink is perfectly safe to be used on eggs, but to me it's just not worth the risk. Before incubating eggs, you also want to make sure that they're nice and clean. Bacteria can multiply very rapidly in the ideal conditions provided by an incubator. Obviously that can affect the chicks growing inside, you don't want them to become infected. Best to just give them a wipe with a clean cloth and some warm water, just to remove any sort of surface debris that might be on there. One last point on hatching eggs, you absolutely must let them rest for 24 hours before you put them in the incubator. You need to store them at room temperature, pointy end, facing down. This is important as it allows the air sac to resettle into the correct place within the egg. Thinking about the little chick that's growing in the egg, what happens is as it develops, it'll move itself so that just before it hatches, it can poke its little beak into the airspace within the egg, and that's where it gets its first breath from. If it can't do that, then obviously it's going to drown and it's not going to be able to hatch. Lack of airspace is actually one of the main reasons why people get a poor hatch rate, so yeah, just make sure you rest your eggs. By far the biggest expense there is on a hatching adventure like this is the incubator. It's probably going to be the first thing that you buy, and there are lots and lots of different models available, some with all the bells and whistles on and some are a bit more basic. Personally, to make life easier, and I know it's more expensive, but I wouldn't even look at a model that doesn't turn the eggs automatically. Eggs need to be turned a minimum of 3 times a day while they're incubating. So if you imagine that you're hatching chickens, for example, that means you're going to have to turn the eggs over every 8 hours for 18 days. And they have to be turned. The whole point is that the yolk needs to stay in the centre of the egg. If just one turn is missed, then the yolk can settle and it'll stick to the side of the shell, and that'll prevent the chick from growing properly and it'll die, so they must be turned. How long it takes eggs to hatch will depend on which species you're looking at, but chickens, for example, take 21 days, and you need to keep turning them until 3 days before hatch day. This is the same with all species, and what it allows is that sort of still period will give the chick time to move into its ideal hatch position. You need to make sure you've got your incubator set up and operating perfectly for at least 24 hours before you put the eggs in. So basically, once your hatching eggs arrived and you've got them resting, now it's time to set up your incubator and get that up and running as well. This is just so that you can make sure everything's running nice and smoothly before you put the eggs in, as once you start the incubating process, you can't stop it without the eggs dying. But, assuming all has gone well and the eggs are incubating now, the next thing you need to think about is getting a heat source ready for them for when they hatch. There are two sort of tried and tested ways of doing this. Number one is using a heat lamp, or you can use a simulated hen. Personally, I prefer hens because they don't emit any light and less of the heat is wasted, so they're much cheaper to run. And how they work is they have a hot plate that leaves a little gap underneath it that the chicks can go under when they get cold. So they sort of treat it just like they would do with a real hen. They'll go back to it when they need to. And once they get underneath, they will instinctively press their backs up against the heat, and that'll warm them through. Or they'll go right into the centre underneath the hen, and that'll be sort of like where the air is warmest for them. You can adjust the height of them to suit any of the chicks that you're raising. So if you've got ducklings or goslings, you can obviously put it much higher than if you've got quail chicks. And you can do that just by altering the length of the legs. You need to be providing the chicks with heat until they're fully feathered, and for most species this is going to take about 6 weeks. You'll know when they don't need it anymore because, certainly with chicken chicks, I tend to find they start roosting on top of the hen rather than going underneath it. But as soon as they're not using it anymore and it's just something that's there around them, then you can take it away, they should be fine. From around day 2 after they've hatched, the chicks will need to be provided with a source of water. This needs to be from a non-slip source. Chicks are really quite unstable on their legs, especially for the first few days, so either a bowl or one of the specialist chick waterers. And the water needs to be no more than 1 centimetre deep. They are, when I say they're unstable on their legs, I mean they really are unstable and they'll fall about quite a lot. For that reason, it's a good idea to put some little rocks or some gravel in the bottom, just so that if a chick does fall in, and they will, they'll be able to climb out easily. With very young chicks, if they fall in the water, they can chill really rapidly, and if they can't get back to their heat source, they can actually become hypothermic within a few minutes. So it's really important that the water should be no more than 1 centimetre deep, and if they fall in, they can climb out easily and get back to the simulated hen or whatever heat source it is that you're using. From day 2, they will also need to be provided with food. Up until this point, the yolk that is still in the chick's stomach will sustain them. But from day 2, you'll need to give them something that they can eat. Best thing for this, I find, is ordinary chick crumbs, which is a sort of finely ground, high-protein feed. It's quite similar to growers' pellets. And what it means is that the very young chicks have everything that they need to grow strong bones and a new set of feathers. For the first week, I'd only give them chick crumbs, but from then on, you can start giving them little tidbits if you want to. I find they like crushed dried mealworms, little seeds, bits of shredded lettuce, anything like that. As they start getting bigger as well, you can start feeding them on normal growers' pellets. Just watch the chicks that you've got, just to make sure that they're not too big for them. Make sure they are actually able to eat it. Lastly, of course, you're going to need something to keep all of these chicks in, and I tend to use underbed storage boxes just because they are easily cleaned, they're cheaply available, and they're not too big. And obviously if they can't get back, then they're at risk of chilling and dying. For up to a week, I wouldn't give them any more than 30 centimetres or a foot away from the heat source. That should be as far as they can go. Once they're walking around confidently, you can give them a bit more space. But up until that point, I would keep them quite close to heat source if you can, just to be safe. What you use for a bedding is entirely up to you. Personally, I tend to use dust-free sawdust just because it's cheaply available and I know that it's not going to do them any harm. Don't use straw or hay or anything like that because it's just going to trip them up. Make sure it's something that's really easy for little creatures to move around on. And in all honesty, that is about it. Raising chicks isn't particularly complicated once you know what you're doing. I know it can feel like an absolute overwhelming amount of information at the beginning, but once you've raised your first batch, you'll find it's quite a sort of systematic process. So just have a quick little recap. Hatching eggs, make sure they're fertile, make sure you store them for 24 hours, pointy end down, before you put them in the incubator, and don't incubate eggs that are damaged in any way. The incubator itself, never mind the cost, just get one with automatic turning. Trust me, you will save yourself an absolute fortune in failed eggs and all that sort of thing in the future. Make sure they've got a heat source ready for when they hatch. That can be a simulated hen or a lamp, it's entirely up to you. And the chicks will need to be provided with heat until they are fully feathered at roughly 6 weeks. Food and water should be provided from day 2 at the latest, and it needs to be in shallow bowls that the chicks can easily climb out of. And that is it from me. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions at all, feel free to pop them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But again, thank you for watching and I hope to see you again soon. Bye bye!